Thank you very much, Phyllis. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I think in the meantime, I also want to thank the previous speaker the previous speakers as you bring an aspect, of the food environment that is increasingly becoming important. And I wish we had the opportunity to reflect upon it more, during our dialogues. But thank you for bringing it up as an emerging issue with regard to especially the urban food environment. So I'm Solophina Nekesa. I'm with ICLEI Africa, and I'm a professional officer for urban systems. So I'll present on city-level innovations in improving Africa's food environments and food systems. And this is going to be a reflection on the outcomes from the independent dialogues that we held in 12 African cities in partnership with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. So I'm going to put us in presentation mode and then start. So just a bit of background on who we are. So ICLEI Africa is a network organization of over 1,750 local governments and regional governments. And particularly in Africa, we have over 250 project cities. And our role is to really support cities and local governments with sustainability planning, and also looking at global agendas and global events and localizing these for cities to be able to implement locally. And, we're speaking about events such as, the ongoing COP26, the recently concluded UN Food Systems Summit, among others. So, and we do the support across different thematic areas, looking at climate change and energy, then looking at nature and biodiversity, and then also looking at generally the urban system, looking at systems such as the food systems, the water systems, circularity as a system that brings all these together, among others. So that is the work we do in supporting cities, and this led us to our collaboration with FAO recently. So with support from FAO, ICLEI and other partners, together with our partners, conducted dialogues in 12 African cities to elevate the voices of cities towards the UN Food Systems Summit. And the overall objective of this was, one, to highlight the role that cities and local governments are playing in improving their food systems. And I think we can think about this, this can really make sense in the context that a lot of these global events have had a focus initially on the role of national governments. But we saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic, local governments were really at the forefront of ensuring that citizens can still access nutritious food, that cities are still functioning in order for, to access different services within the city. So they do have a key role to play, and we have to start recognizing it and supporting cities in improving their urban food systems. And then also the aim of this was to also generate discussions, actions, and commitments from local governments on food systems reforms, and to connect these dialogues with the national UNFSS member states and summit dialogues, and to achieve a lasting cooperation in urban food systems and strengthen the city food engagement platforms, among others. And I can see within our audience today, we do have some participants that were with us in the dialogues in Ghana and other African cities. So I'm happy that you're here with us again to hear some of the outcomes, but then also what really innovation means, especially in African cities when it comes to urban food systems. And so before I move away from that, I would like to use 1 minute to hear back from you. When we are speaking about city-level innovations in Africa's food environments, what comes to mind? What do you think it should aspire to? What should these environments look like? I would like to please encourage you to use the chat to respond to what you understand by what city-level innovations are. And I'll give it 1 minute to see what's coming in from the different speakers or from the different attendees present here today. The question is, what do you understand by city-level innovations? Or what do you think Africa's urban food system should aspire to in terms of innovations, to be able to achieve resilience, to achieve food security, among others? So I'll read out some of the contributions coming through. So I'll give it 30 seconds to see what is coming through. What do we understand by city level innovations before I can move on to share what we saw cities are doing. You can please use the chat function. There's increasing household fresh food growing, ICT, something about smart markets can also play a role. There's urban agriculture also coming in as what can be referred to as city level innovations. There's partnerships with non-traditional food environment actors. Urban gardens is back again. All right, I'll then school gardens also. This is really very important. You know, the importance of the school meal, you know, is really important in terms of the development of the child, but then also the long-term thriving of children. Then public procurement also, increasing green spaces. This is very important. You know, that green spaces form part of the physical environment, improved value chains. And this we saw was very important during the COVID-19 pandemic when there were disruptions across the food value chain. So when we think about innovations, what do this look like, especially in terms of shocks and stresses to the system? Healthy meals in the workplace, this is very important because we spend a lot of our time in the workplace. So what is that environment around us that influences the decisions we are making around that? Then healthy food habits, smart water systems. I think this speaks to really the wider connection of the food systems to other urban services, water, energy, among others. Thank you very much for your contribution, and I will get back to this. You know, women empowerment. This speaks about issues around inclusion, shortening supply chains. I think we need to dig deeper what really shortening supply chains means without excluding different actors. Food safety is also very important. So I'll come back to this as we are as I continue with the presentation. And thank you very much for your contributions. So these are the cities, maybe just to go back before I move on, these are the cities in which we held the dialogues. It was, you know, there was quite a good spread across the continent, and this gave us an idea of where cities are at along their journey of urban food governance and urban food systems innovation. So we had Nairobi and Kisumu in Eastern Africa. We had Accra and Tamale in West Africa, Antananarivo in Southern, Kigali and Rulindo also in Eastern Africa, Entebbe, Cape Town in Southern Africa, then Dodoma and Arusha in Eastern Africa, Kilimani in Southern, and Tunis in North Africa. So it really gave us quite a wide spread of cities, you know, to be able to do the comparison of what's happening in West Africa. What are some of the priorities and challenges coming out in West Africa and South Africa and East Africa? So I just want to go back to that question of us. What does innovation mean to you? And narrow this down to innovation governance, because our work does deal with cities and local governments. So what does innovation mean? And I decided to look at this first generally before I can narrow down to what it means for urban food systems. You know, here innovation, we're speaking at, you know, systems or mechanisms to align goals, to allocate resources and assign decision-making authority, you know, for innovation. And this has to be done both vertically and horizontally. You know, with such a cross-cutting portfolio with regard to urban food system, coordination has to be done, you know, vertically across horizontally across different departments within, for example, municipalities, but then also horizontally across different sectors that are directly or indirectly related. You know, here innovation speaks to coordination, you know, coordination across several cross-functional processes and generating ideas. You know, as I've said before, you know, food systems are very cross-cutting. So coordination across several functional processes is key to food system governance and innovation. Then establishing overarching visions and set of values. You know, what do we want our urban food systems to achieve? You know, especially following the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, we want our food systems to be resilient. We want our food systems to deliver equity and nutritious food. You know, and then looking about innovation also speaks to prioritizing. You know, if different cities are at different level in their journey of urban food governance. So when we're looking at innovation, what are we prioritizing? Some cities are, for example, Cape Town recently experienced water shortage. So when we're speaking about prioritizing, then looking at water innovations around water would be priority. And I've also seen some contributions.
Yes.
I've seen some contributions in the chat speaking to defining roles, ways of decision making, looking at power, looking at also commitment. I think to me this speaks to issues around inclusivity, around stakeholders, who gets to make decisions within food systems governance. And then I think importantly, defining how to measure success. How do we know that we're innovating? How do we know that we're innovating right or wrong? How do we know that we're getting the results for which we are innovating? I think this directly speaks to issues around monitoring and evaluation as part of the innovation process. So with that in mind, I would like to now go down to some of the 5 strategic areas that were identified for urban food system transformation and innovation. And this comes directly out of the outcomes from the dialogues that I've been speaking about. So I think, even if it's with regard to, speaking about technology, with regard to speaking about increase in food production, these are the key strategic areas that should be at the forefront of planning of urban food governance. Issues around equity and inclusive processes. I think this speaks to full participation in decision making, especially for the underrepresented societies, as well as marginalized communities. Also looking at, ease in access to nutritious, safe and affordable food. Who can afford affordable food, nutritious food in the city? And who can afford food that is not nutritious? And also looking at culturally appropriate foods. This also speaks to issues around diversification of diets and that sort of thing. So equity and inclusive processes is really one of those overarching areas that should filter through all these other strategic areas that have been identified for urban food system transformation and innovation. So looking at also national, regional, and local food governance. I think this is important to highlight that, when we're speaking about urban food, it exists within the context of the national as well as the regional food system. So how do we, innovate? Innovation here speaks directly to working together, to better coordinating policies, planning, and interventions across these different levels vertically, the local level, the national level, and the regional level. Then also, I think with the rapidly growing cities, and we know that a lot of the African cities we did hold the dialogues with, most of them were colonial planned cities, and they were planned to keep food out of the city. So in the sense that, some cities were almost illegal to grow food in the city. So when we are thinking about these rapidly growing cities that we are planned a certain way, then how are we looking at our future cities in terms of food and urban planning? How do we integrate food into our cities? How do we use our spaces? How are we building infrastructure that is able to allow for the movement of food? And what are the funding mechanisms, or as well as the policies in place that are ensuring that planning is putting food at the center, but then not at the edges as it was done before. And I think we see, for example, certain cities like Nairobi, like Entebbe, these are really typical examples of colonial cities that were planned to keep out food growing from the city centers. And in some cases, it was even illegal. So now that we've come to a time when we need to rethink how we're designing cities, how policies are implemented in cities, and then we need to think about how to implement, for example, how to ensure that food is at the center of urban planning. So I think what the issue relating to emergency planning and response, this is something that we always sort of pushed to areas that that were experiencing maybe war and floods, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, even urban centers, they were experiencing shortages of food, and therefore there was need for emergency planning and emergency response. So then, what does innovation in this area look like? Do cities have to develop informed emergency food response and recovery plans? Are they in place already? Seeing that we are 2 years into the pandemic, what is the long-term structural structural systems in place to ensure that in case of other shocks and stresses, cities are ready to respond. And then also amplifying existing stresses such as food insecurity. So really the issue of emergency planning has always been left to, extremely marginalized areas, but now it has come to attention that, cities also need to start planning and innovating towards this. And then also the issues around healthy and resilient food environments is important. And this speaks to issues around the food supply chains, looking at both the formal and informal economies, especially for African cities. Our food environments are very diverse, and they're comprised of both formal and informal actors. So when we are building, when we're thinking about planning and shaping what the environment should look like in terms of policy, in terms of the physical environment, and then we should be aware that we are doing this for both formal and informal actors and how we can best integrate them. So these were the 5 strategic areas identified for urban food system innovation, but then also the areas that we should keep in mind when planning for resilient, for nutritious food environments or urban food environments. So quickly, I'll go to the 10 critical actions. So I would like you to look at this more of as the entry points for innovation. It's almost, I want to call it a menu. If you have this menu and you are in a certain city, you're understanding the context first, and then seeing what part of this menu applies to the city. So we call them 10 critical actions for urban food systems transformation, and I added the element of innovation because transformation, movement towards a positive direction, to me speaks to innovation. So I would like to refer to this as also sort of the menu of entry points into urban food system transformation or innovation. And some of these we've talked about or I've briefly explained before. So looking at coherent policy is important. Coherent and integrated food policies that look at multi-stakeholder engagements. That is almost the place to start. If we're looking at, because policy in a way has such a filtering influence on all other, on what is happening on ground in the city. So looking at coherent and integrated policies is a beginning point when we're looking at urban food systems transformation. Looking at territorial linkages, and I think this one speaks to really simplifying supply chains, leveraging logistics from neighboring territories, and also building local investments, among others. Then adopting accessible and inclusive finance systems. To me, this is a key innovation because, especially for small scale businesses, because during our discussions, we discovered that, the urban centers are really a collection of very small scale businesses that are involved in food, and that is food retail, food vending, food growing, but the level of access to finance, is very limited to such small scale actors. So then how do local governments work with institutions, with finance institutions, or also encourage, for example, small scale saving through institutions such as SACCOs, which are small saving societies, that can enable access to finance for small scale actors. Then public procurement. I saw that in the chat, and to me, I think this is really innovation. That looks at public procurement does drive sustainable markets. It does promote good nutrition, especially in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, and then it also does boost the local economy and support school meal programs. And I saw this coming up in the chat as well. Then data collection, management, and dissemination. I think the previous speakers did speak about data, and it was also recognized as an important food system transformation or innovation element. And then also investing in critical infrastructure and technologies. Also, the previous speakers did speak about this. Technology as part of an influencer of the urban food environment or the food environments. That's something that we have to put into consideration, because technology directly speaks to efficiency. It speaks to safety across the food value chain. It ensures access to nutritious food for consumers. It connects producers with markets, and it promotes economic development and enhances value addition, among others. Then promoting sustainable urban agriculture, that was also hinted on as a form of innovation or transformation. So beyond providing nutritious food, urban agriculture is a tool for connecting communities and supplementing incomes in cities. Then reducing food loss and waste, looking at leading climate action. Achieving sustainable food systems should be directly linked to climate action. Especially mitigation and adaptation strategies where they are necessary. Climate information services here, offering insurance services as well, supporting afforestation initiatives, reducing food miles, sharing sustainable agriculture practices, among others. And then, of course, integrating food into planning and urban design. So this I talked about earlier. So then I'll go straight to some of the cases from the cities, from either governance perspective, from a data perspective, and then also from initiatives that have been implemented. What are some of the cases from the cities? We're seeing Kisumu, the Kisumu multi-stakeholder platform, which is a Kisumu Food Liaison Action Group, which is a great example of a multi-stakeholder platform that comprises local government, academia, civil society, business, among others. And the aim is to advise the municipality on food-related issues and develop appropriate policies and interventions with the municipality. Then going to Antananarivo, they've convened a food policy council, and this also consists of various food system stakeholders and businesses. And their role is to support coordination between different efforts to improve food security. Then coming to Cape Town, I think Cape Town is also an interesting case because, in order for them to respond adequately to food system challenges and opportunities, so the city did commit to putting in place strong food system database. So, and this is leveraging on support from food system stakeholders, that is academia, businesses, among others. And I think just to speak more to the Cape Town cases that, recently there were riots in KwaZulu-Natal, which is a province still in South Africa. But Cape Town did not take a chance. But because they had already developed the food system database, they were ready to act and react in case of any disturbances to the food system. So identifying where can the city access, for example, extra food, and those sort of measures in place. So using the existing database to be able to inform the city to respond in case they experience the same disruptions to the food system as was experienced in Johannesburg and KwaZulu-Natal. Then also Accra. So Accra, through partnerships, they've developed a municipal solid waste characterization and qualification study and quantification study that has been done. And this is valuable, especially for comprehensive, critical, and informative evaluation of waste management options in the city's waste management programs moving forward. Then Tamale, I think Tamale did speak about the One Village, One Dam initiative as a means to ensure that water is available regularly for farmers and other producers. So this could be a small-scale innovation at village level, but once it's multiplied throughout the city and its hinterland, it does make a difference. The Nairobi's recently published the Nairobi City County Food System Strategy for public comments in February 2021. To us, this is a big step for the city in identifying, as well as coordinating the food system priorities and mechanism for addressing its different challenges. So that's the end of my presentation, and I thank you so much for paying attention. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to me.